Hi there. In this tutorial I'm going to cover the basic elements of how to create a scene something like this. So we've got the main element, which is obviously the water simulation. We've got the simulation of the glass, and then there's some lighting to do as well to give it the more dramatic look. And obviously to get the water shooting out of the glass, I've got an ice cube which I've dropped into it, so there's an element of animation in this as well. So we'll get started. Begin with let's make the glass, as that's going to be a container for our liquid. Typically with things like this I start off with a mesh circle. It's a very good shape to start off with these sorts of things. I'll just put my screencast keys on and we're going to orthographic mode. So we'll start right at the bottom, go into edit mode, press E and then extrude out a little and push it up a little just to give a slightly rounded bottom. Then E again. Won't necessarily be exactly the same as the last time I did it, but it'll give a general view. I pressed Z there just so that I can see through the mesh, which I'll need to do in a minute. E again, we'll take it up there, expand it out slightly. I'm just thinking something like that. And now to form the inside of the glass, so E again, up, scale in slightly with S. E again, scale in slightly, push it down a little bit, and then back into front view. E again, bring it down to just above that line, or just below it actually I think. Scale it in, and I want the thickness of the glass to be fairly consistent along this edge, so I'm lining up the edges that I've got selected with the ones that are not selected to try and get them roughly similar. They don't have to be identical, but similar. Then E again, take it down a bit more, scale it in. This is going to get a subsurf applied to it, so that's obviously going to round everything off, but you just get a rough approximation of it. Look from the top, and then what I'll do is E, scale into about there, and then we'll just press F to close that face, and we now need to close the bottom. So right click, hold Alt down as I select it, E, scale it in, and I think what we'll do is we'll just lift the bottom up slightly, E, scale it in, and for this one I'll just Alt M at centre. So there's two different ways that you can close a mesh off. So that's the basic glass. We'll save this. And we need to give that a texture obviously as well. But before we do that, I think what we'll do is we'll add the subdivision surface. Now what we probably will need to do is add a few more loops into here just to help it work properly. And also I think I'll select those loops and I'll just bring them in just to give a bit more shape to the glass. And we'll add a few there, so that pushes that down a little bit more. So now we've got a bit more shape there. So I don't need to use a solidify modifier because I've created both the inside and outside edges. And T to bring that menu up, and we'll go to smooth. So we'll now add a texture. This will just be a simple glass texture. With glass textures you need to, if you want them to be fairly clear, you will need to push the default whiteness or brightness of the texture up. I'm going to give this a slight blue tinge, and we'll bring some default lights in that I've got, and we'll have a look at what that's like. In fact, before I do that, I'm going to add a plane, scale it 10 times. I'm going to rotate it on the Z-axis 45, go into edit mode, just checking where the camera's looking from. Yep. E to extrude. We're still in orthographic mode. Take that back a little bit. E to extrude again, and take it back, and extrude again, then add a subdivision surface to that, and smooth shading. Probably afford to make it a little bigger. And now I'll select my camera. In fact, I'll just make this glass a bit smaller, I think. And what I'm going to do also is I'm going to change around the aspect ratio of the image. So I've got 1920 by 1080, so we'll just swap that round. 1920 down here and 1080 up there. Selecting just the camera, right clicking on the edge of the camera view, and we'll now turn border render off so that it only renders what's in here. Save. We'll go to 50% to speed it up, and we'll have a look at the render view. So you can see that's quite a dark glass at the moment, so I'll come back, select my glass, we'll name it now, go to my material, and we'll brighten that up a little bit. So you really don't need very much colour on glass for it to give a coloured glass effect. And we'll put the IOR up to about 1.5. So we just get a subtle colouring either side here. So that's our glass made. That's very easy because we've got a default material already in Blender. We're in cycles mode, of course. So the next thing I'll make is the ice cube. It's obviously another fairly simple shape. So we'll just add a cube, bring it up to about here, scale it down. Now obviously ice cubes aren't perfectly cubic, so what I'll do is I'll add some more vertices first of all. So I'll add a loop cut about there. You can go to a lot more detail than I'm going to with ice cubes because obviously they may have bubbles in and things like that. This one's not going to be that visible, so I'm not going to worry too much about that side of it. And then finally a couple of loop cuts. The purpose of these loop cuts is that when I add the subdivision surface, they help to define the shape. If I don't, then this whole cube will basically turn into a sphere. So we then come over to modifiers and we add the subdivision surface, and you can see there, put it up to 2, it's no longer a perfect cube. There's other ways of doing this, of course. Just going to move that in a little bit now just to make it a little more rounded. Not saying anything I'm doing is the best way to do it, it's simply a way. And if you want to, obviously you can add some more cuts and then do things like putting little nicks and dents and whatnot into the ice cube to make it slightly more random. Put some cuts there, cuts there. Be aware that we are going to have quite a lot of geometry in the scene once we put the water simulation on, so it's just worth bearing that in mind, especially if it's going to be an animated scene or something like that. So this will do for the tutorial. Looking through the background there, and all we really need to do now is obviously give it, I think we'll make it slightly smaller, and we'll put some rotation on it, and now we just need to give it a texture. So new texture, glass texture again, but this time I'm only going to set it to 1.3 for the IOR. We'll basically leave it clear. So if we set that to render now and bring the lights back in, we can see it up there. And what we may want to do is add a tiny bit of roughness just to make it a little bit more visible. Perhaps that's a bit too much. Now you could do other things, such as if you were really wanting to make it look realistic, by adding displacement on the surface and things like that, just to give you more detail, but this is barely going to be visible, so in this case it's not really worth doing. So that's our ice cube, and the material is ice. So the next thing we need to do is animate that falling into our cup. So nowadays with rigid body physics that's pretty easy. So we'll come down here on the left hand side, open up rigid body tools, and we'll add the cup as a passive. And then we'll come up to our ice cube and we'll add that as active. Now let's see what happens. It's fine. That falls into our cup. And it gets there at about 25. Okay. That's all I really need to do with the ice cube at the moment. And now we'll go to the next step, which is to create the liquid. So we'll just save that. So we'll come back to our cup, go into edit mode, and what I'll do is I'll use C and select an area, and we'll select the bottom vertices on the inside, and then Control plus, and that will expand our selection, and we'll say that the glass, rather, not cup, was about that full. Then I'll press D to duplicate, and I'll shrink it in ever so slightly. Now P to separate by selection, and now if I come out of edit mode I've actually got effectively a duplicate of the inside surface of that glass. I'll go back into edit mode, and we need a few faces along the top, so I can't just press F. Press E, come in quite a long way, you can see I've got a subsurf on there, close to the middle, and E again, and Alt M at centre, and then Control R, add a reasonable number of loops, and then this outer loop, press G twice and take it out towards the edge, so the liquid's effectively flat with the inside surface. We now need to give that a new material. It's currently set to glass, or glass with one S apparently. So if I press this number here, this is telling me that two objects have this material applied. So if I press that, it's now giving it a new name with 001 on the end, and there's nothing there. So that means I've now given this a unique material that is a copy of the original. Fortunately, water really isn't very different to glass, so we'll call this water. A slight difference in IOR, so we'll set this to 1.33. The exact numbers you use don't matter that much, and at the end of the day, if it's a particular look you're going for, start off with these numbers but then vary them just to achieve whatever it is you're trying to get to. And we'll take the colour back out of that, so we'll take these back out. What I often do is, in the viewport settings, I'll give things like this a different colour just to help me see which item is which. So that's that, and I'll give my ice a greenish colour. This is only the viewport colours, this does not affect the colour in the rendered scene. So we'll save that, and we'll just have a look at what that looks like rendered. Just check. And there we are, that's a very simple render of a glass with some water in it. So that's the start. But what won't happen at the moment if I play, I've just realised, of course, because the way I duplicated it, it's got the rigid body passive parameters applied to it, so I'll remove those and now apply the animation, and the ice cube just drops through, which is fine. So now what I need to do is come over to physics, and I need to add fluid simulation. In order to do that, I need to add a boundary, a domain as it were. So I add a new cube. Center that cube over the glass, bottom of it just below the glass. And what I can do also is, I've gone into edit mode, so I can lift the cube up to about there, and now when I expand the cube it will expand from the bottom. So scale it. That shouldn't be too bad. And this is the domain, so we'll call this fluid domain. We'll come over to here, select fluid, and we'll call this domain. We'll give the cache a new reference because it was picking up an old simulation that I'd done. And what we'll do is, we need to select our fluid in the middle, and we need to make sure that that's part of the fluid simulation, and we set that to fluid. We won't change anything else at the moment, and we select our glass, and we set this to fluid, and we set this as an obstacle, and then we select our ice cube, make that part of the fluid simulation, and we set this as an obstacle. So the next thing we need to do is go back to selecting our domain. We'll just save there. We haven't given the domain a texture yet, but we'll do that now, and that of course is going to be the water again. It didn't really matter what texture we gave to the water, as it were, we put in here, because this object in here is just going to tell the system where to put the water that is actually created from this domain box. Once the simulation is done, we can remove that. Okay, so we now go to the physics panel. We'll leave it at this relatively low resolution at the moment. Yeah, we'll leave it there. We'll go to final for the viewport display. We'll leave it on 4 seconds. Yeah, 4 seconds should do it. That should take us up to about 100 frames at 25 frames a second. So what we now need to do, just save and bake. So this will take a few moments, and there's obviously a problem here, and I know what it is. And the problem is, we'll just stop the simulation. You can see that the fluid has been created, but it's all peculiar, and the reason is because of the way I created this inner shape. The normals are in the wrong direction. So if I bring up that menu with N, going to edit mode, and then we come down here and we show the normals, we can see that they're actually pointing inward. So all I need to do is select them all and recalculate, and you can now see they're pointing outward, which is the correct direction. So we now come back into our fluid simulation, select the fluid, and we come over here. Before I do that, I think I'm going to colour this a different colour to make it easier to select. So we'll give this a unique version of the water and make that a different colour, because I'm going to need to remove this in a minute. So now I can select that, come back to my simulation and bake. Okay, I stopped the recording for a moment there just to let the baking go ahead, and also to correct a slight problem that I noticed, which was that for the glass that was set to volume. Now the problem with volume is that it will only use literally the volume of the glass, so the whole area in here was an obstacle for the liquid, which meant that the simulation couldn't really run because the liquid was coming from the object I created inside the glass, but couldn't go anywhere because the whole volume of the glass was in the way. So it didn't really work. But once I set that to shell, then obviously it just uses the shell that I've created, and that then allowed the simulation to run. Now at the moment it's running at a very low resolution, so it's not really staying within the glass. And there's another issue as well which you'll notice, which is that the water doesn't react to the ice cube that falls in. But we'll deal with those issues one at a time. We'll put the resolution of the water simulation up a little bit. We'll put this up to 85, and we'll start that baking again, just to make sure that it is working better. Obviously even 85 is still quite a low resolution, and really you're going to be wanting to run this at something like 150, 200, which will take significantly longer. You can see already that the simulation is running much more slowly now, but we can play the animation a little bit as we go, and you can see the water's now staying inside there. It sort of collapsed slightly into the glass once the simulation started, and although it's showing out through the edges, it's staying within. But I'm not worried too much about that at the moment. I'm just trying to get everything working. So you can see there's the water and there's the ice cube falling into it. So we'll stop that there. I was just making sure there wasn't some other problem. So we now need to find a way to make this falling ice cube interact with the water. What we really need to do is we need to make this an animation rather than just simply rely on the physics, because the physics, bullet physics, doesn't seem to interact directly with liquid physics. So what we can do is we can bake this to keyframes. So you'll notice that over here we've got baked keyframes. So if we just do that, and we'll do it up to about 125 because I've only got the liquid simulation running for about 100, and we'll say OK on that. And there we go, we've got some keyframes now. So I can now select the glass, remove the physics from there, select the ice cube, remove the physics from there, but what should still happen is you see the ice cube still falls, but now it's not actually using physics to do that, it's actually an animation, which means that with a bit of luck, when I rebake my liquid, so I've selected the liquid and I bake it, with a bit of luck that should now interact with the ice cube. So we'll let it run a little bit along here and we'll see how that's doing. There you go, you can just see it starting to happen there. Just wait for a little bit longer and then we'll play it again, and you can see there, you can see the water's actually starting to react to the ice cube falling in now. And obviously in this case, because of the speed at which the ice cube is falling, it's not a particularly large splash, and obviously we can play with things like the viscosity of the liquid, the speed of the ice cube and so on, and it will certainly show a little bit more when we do it at a higher resolution. So I'll stop the baking there and let's just have a look at what we've got. So you can see the liquid does react now to the ice cube. So we'll save that and we'll now go back to our liquid and we'll have a look at what options we've got. So one of the things we'll do is we will generate some particles. So that's little dots and whatnot of the particles themselves, and what we'll do is we will put the resolution of the fluid up quite a bit. I'm going to stop the recording for a moment while I bake it, but we'll put this up to 125, and you'll notice the memory needed now is much higher. In fact, we'll go for 150 and we will start simulation there. So I'll stop the recording and we'll come back when that's done. Okay, I gave that several minutes and we've got a little bit more to see now, so you can see we are starting to get the fluid get thrown out of the glass. We've still got a problem of the liquid creeping through now. As we go up to higher and higher resolutions that will become less of an issue, but in order to help it, I think what we'll do is I will select the inner object and we'll scale that Shift Z so it doesn't scale it on the Z axis. We'll bring that in a little bit, and what we can do right at the very end after all of the baking has been done is we can increase the size of the glass itself so that it encloses all of the fluid. But basically this is now giving us the starts of a good render. Again, every time you do this with different gravity settings, things like that, you're going to get different amounts of fluid come out. You can, of course, which is what I did the first time, just simply animate the ice cube straight down like that, and depending on how fast you do it will vary how much water is thrown out. So if we come back to some of the water settings now, these are the viscosity ones, so you may want to play with this. Let's try 0.85. Not necessarily realistic, but again, this is all about a particular look that you're trying to achieve rather than absolute realism. We need to come down to fluid boundary because if we want tracer particles and little dots and bubbles and whatnot, we need to change some of the settings here. So we'll take away remove air bubbles and we'll include one subdivision. Now don't put too many on here because this will significantly increase the render time. I'm also going to come over to here and select smooth shading. We need to add in fact a subdivision surface, but I'll leave that until the bake has been done because that'll just make it take even longer. We'll save that simulation and we'll start baking that. So that's off baking and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, then we've let that run for a little while. I haven't let it complete the entire simulation, but we've now got a reasonably good result. I've adjusted a few settings, and that is I've put the real world size actually up to about 1.5 meters. The smaller you make that, the less particles you seem to get. So if you want a lot of splashing like this, you need to make that a little bit bigger. And as you can see, we've got a reasonably good result there. It's not identical to my previous one. Obviously it all depends on velocity of the ice cube and whatnot, and you can obviously vary that. You don't have to make the ice cube fall the way I did this time. The first time I did it, I simply animated the ice cube in the usual way. So once you've got something that you like, you just stop it there, for example. We can have a look at what that's going to look like in the camera. So if we select our camera and then move that up a little bit, we'll need to bring it in to about there. We'll save that. The other thing I'm going to do actually before I go any further is I'm going to add a subsurf to the water. So just a simple subsurf, and I'll also need to remove my inside object, the water inflow from the rendered scene. So all I'll do is I'll move that to the next layer. If I have to resimulate, it won't make any difference. So save that, and then we'll have a look at what the rendered version looks like. Just a low resolution render. And you can see, yes, it's okay. Obviously the lighting still needs work, but we've basically got what we're looking for. We've got a lot of water particles in the scene, or blobs of water. We're getting some caustics on there, and obviously there's the glass. And I think what we'll also do is I'll just render slightly more previews than that, because it's rendering quite quickly at the moment. So that's not bad, but obviously isn't terribly exciting. We haven't got much drama in it, and that's because we need to play with the lighting a little bit. I've got a basic 3-point lighting set up at the moment, but obviously even if you stick with that you need to vary it, and one of the problems is one of my lights is actually behind this, so this barrier that I'm using. So I'll bring that forward. This is my highlights light, so it's a bright but very small light, and I'll bring that to about here, and that's going to shine on this background as well. And we'll just make sure that this light, which is my key light, so this is the one providing the majority of the light in the scene, I'm going to make it a little smaller, which will sharpen the shadows, but I'm also going to brighten it up. So as you no doubt know, the Cycles engine, you can use objects or planes or anything else that you want as light sources. And then this one here, this is my fill light, so this is basically just there to make sure we haven't got any really dark shadows. So typically this is quite large but also quite dim, so I'll take this down to about 1 for the moment and rotate it on the Z just to make sure it's facing the right way. And I'll just go back and select this one, because this is actually quite an important one for a scene like this, because it's going to give some light on the background, or some variation of light on the light and shadow on the background, but it's also going to pick out some of the water. There's a lot more vertices, so it may take a little bit longer to render now, but let's have a look. It's starting to work. It needs a little bit more work on it in terms of the light. I think what we need is a light more down here now, so what I'll do is I'll lower this light to about there, increase the size a little bit, and increase the intensity, and we'll see what that looks like. And I think for my background, give that slightly darker texture, so it's just a sort of neutral grey texture. So that's my rim light. I'll just keep that selected and we'll have a look at that. So that's darkened the scene a little bit, but that also means that the highlights are showing up a bit more. So now it's a little bit too much. You can see how that light is shining quite strongly down there, and it's starting to work because I'm getting a bit more variation now in the water, and you can see the water shows up because of the highlights being picked out. Bear in mind this is just a low resolution preview at the moment, so that's a bit too high brightness there, but overall it's not too bad. So we'll just stop that there, we'll shrink that one down a little bit, and I think we'll raise it up slightly as well, perhaps move it slightly further away. I've got these set so they don't show up in the render themselves, it's only the light they cast that shows up. Now we're starting to get there, and I think that's probably worth rendering at a slightly higher resolution now, and we'll just start that rendering. So this will take a bit longer. Probably needs a little bit more light in the scene. I think I can afford to turn that rim light up a little bit now, so we'll stop that, drop it slightly. This is, for a scene like this, it is playing around with the lights that's one of the most important things. And we'll turn our key light up slightly, I think, as well, because it's really all about light. Because we're using transparent and shiny objects, it's all about where the highlights are, where the glints come from. And you can see I've now got a reflection showing up there, which I don't necessarily want, so I would need to move that light. But you can see we're starting to get the effect that I was looking for now. We're getting that bright light behind the glass. In fact, I'm quite pleased with that, apart from the reflection that we've got there, which I'm pretty sure is either the rim light showing through or it is my key light. But you can see that bright light behind there grading up as it shines across the background. Gives a pretty good effect. So overall I think that's really starting to work. We just need to move some of the lights around. So I think that'll do for the tutorial. This is the result of the one that I did. So you can see again I had the light basically behind it. I used in fact a flat plane so it looked like a table, slightly shiny, and then a flat plane behind it, sort of light grey colour. Again there you can see the ice cube that fell in, very similar effect. Really quite a simple scene, but quite effective as well. And you just have to play around with the velocity of the ice cube and things like that to see what patterns you get in the water that comes out. This one was going quite fast, so obviously most of the water was ejected. So I hope you found that useful. If there's any questions, let me know, or if you've got any comments or requests for future tutorials, just let me know in the comments below. Thanks a lot.